We were very close to seeing a huge blockbuster deal between the Habs and the Oilers at the deadline. Could it be revisited? We'll get into those details of what the deal was being discussed. Timo Meier to Jersey, what's it going to take for him to stay? What repercussions could it mean for the rest of the team if he does? Same goes for Patrick Kane with the Rangers. If he wants to stay and re-sign, will they have to make sacrifices in other areas? What other trades could we possibly see? We have some other signings today, including some prospects on a few teams, including Chicago. We also have significant injury news for players like Svechnikov or Terry Lehkonen. Big update on Ryan O'Reilly and more. All on coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. We're finally back to the normal recording setup in studio here in the other part of my home where we haven't seen them, of course, on the videos here the past couple of days. I've been home for 2 days for vacation, but had some things I had to do in this room, so recording wasn't exactly ideal. So we're finally back to the old grind, back to the old setup, and that'll only keep going here for the next period of time. I will be away coming up on the weekend coming up. Otherwise, so we'll see some more videos from the road in just a few days' time. Otherwise, we'll be back to the normal setup. But on to the action here, the news. We have a variety of things to discuss. First up, let's look at some prospect signings today in Chicago. They've signed 2 prospects. One's their own player they drafted, and one is another drafted player who did not sign with their existing team. Rights expired, and they became eligible to sign elsewhere. And that player is Ryder Rolston. He's a center and a winger. He can play both positions. He's 21 years old. Originally drafted in the 5th round of the 2020 NHL draft by the Colorado Avalanche. Played college hockey at the University of Notre Dame. So essentially, he's a college free agent that has now signed with the Blackhawks. So he gets his ELC in place. And the other signing is a 2020 third-round pick from Chicago from the University of Minnesota Duluth, Wyatt Kaiser, who's a left-shot defenseman, 20 years old. Kaiser will soon have a birthday and be 21, obviously being drafted 3 years ago. He's not that young because I also had to be at least 18 to be drafted. So certainly going to be a couple of players jump into the prospect pool here with Chicago. We'll see what they get for opportunities. Obviously, the Blackhawks are running a fairly thin crew there, and they might be able to get more of an opportunity to get some NHL action. So we'll see what happens with their futures in Chicago. Now on to some injury updates, and we got some significant ones, including Svechnikov, the Carolina Hurricanes' top sniper, is confirmed now. Originally it was concerned and believed, but not confirmed, but it is now. Torn ACL, surgery required, season over. That is such a bad break and big blow for Svechnikov and the Hurricanes. Especially, it makes it even worse that Max Pacioretty, who was acquired from Vegas for practically nothing, compared to his future considerations, also, hurt in the offseason with a torn Achilles tendon, rehabs and comes back 6 months later, only to have the injury reoccur within a few games, and he's done. So last year and last couple of years, really in the playoffs, the Carolina Hurricanes have had some good runs. They've had some really solid regular seasons. They've had some good playoff success, but the belief was, and not only from the fan base and fans of the league, but the team, you could tell their strategy was that they needed another proven goal scorer. I've even heard head coach Rod Brindamore mention this a variety of times, especially last year's season debrief after losing in the playoffs. Essentially, he confirmed his theory that he felt they needed another game breaker, another top scorer. Like, they're really built well to defend. They've had solid goaltending. They've had a really good blue line. They've obviously had some offense. They have some, their offensive players are not necessarily the most elite. Like, you have some teams that'll have like an elite player, your top guys. The Devils have Jack Hughes. The Oilers have Connor McDavid. The Avalanche have McKinnon. Their top guys are still not quite to that level. So they have to almost score and play more offensively by committee. And when you're, needing another goal scorer, and you went out and got one, and Pacioretty for nothing. And they got defenseman Dylan Coffel as well, because Vegas was in such a cap jam. They took advantage of that. And it's just so unfortunate how things have played out, that they're not going to have the extra scorer. And then on top of that, the guy who's been there for a few years since he was drafted quite highly, obviously, is now gone too. Svechnikov has been a consistent goal scorer, very important piece in their top 6, and they're certainly going to suffer, with him not being there. Somebody else they're going to have other players step up, whether it be Seth Jarvis or Marty Necas and Sebastian Aho they're all going to have to play even better, even stronger. And we'll see. I mean, this is certainly with the strong teams in the East. You get the Bruins, the Devils, the Leafs, the Lightning. Obviously the Rangers. They're going to possibly be in tough. It's hard to say. I mean, right now they have a division lead, but that might not stay. They could slip away. They could end up in that 2-3 spot. So they may end up with a tougher opponent in round one. And we'll see how this impacts them. But the Svechnikov injury is significant. Major bad blow. Especially surprising, too, how Carolina, even though they already knew the bad news on Pacioretty as the NHL trade deadline, they did make some additions, but they didn't really add a proven top 6 goal scorer like many expected. They did add Puljujarvi, who was not that. He's more of a third-line good defensive player who can chip in a little bit of offense, but maybe getting reunited with some of his old Finnish teammates, like Aho, for example, will help get him going. But still, they didn't really address that situation, which I know myself and some other people certainly found surprising, and now it gets worse. So I feel bad for them because they're such a strong team. They've come so close on a number of occasions, and it's going to be even tougher now. The Maple Leafs got good injury news updates on Ryan O'Reilly. Kyle Lewis spoke today, did confirm that the broken finger for O'Reilly is on track, and he should return before the end of the regular season. So he'll be able to get some more regular season action, and probably not a lot. He's probably going to be returning, I would say, based on the timelines near the end. So maybe the last few games or so, but at least he won't be out for the rest of the season, so that's certainly encouraging news there. Another team that's been decimated by injuries is the Avalanche. Things got worse last night. Arturi Lehkonen, who was making his return to Montreal, of course, he was the big deadline acquisition by the Avalanche from the Habs last deadline, and was a key contributor and played a strong role in helping the Avalanche have a lot of success and ultimately win the Stanley Cup last year. Came back to Montreal, was having a heck of a game, multiple goals, multiple points, played real well. Then he had to exit with an apparent hand injury, and now we've got confirmation that he has a broken finger. It needs to be surgically repaired, and he's out 4 to 6 weeks. That's a big blow for a team who's already got a big uncertainty around Captain Gabriel Landeskog, who's been out the entire season, and they don't know if or when he's going to be able to come back and play this year. The Avalanche have had so much injury news this year. It's been terrible. They've really been up against it pretty hardcore. It's just the nature of the game sometimes, but we'll see how this affects them. Obviously, Lehkonen's a key contributor, as I mentioned, and obviously not knowing when you're going to get any other players back like Landeskog is going to hurt. And at this point, playoffs for them are not 100% confirmed, and even if they do make it, it's hard to say where they're going to finish. They could be a wildcard team. They could be the number 3 team in the Central. It's really hard to say. They could still end up with a really tough matchup and missing some key players. You have to wonder if they might go from being Cup champions to being an early exit. They're going to be tough up against it. I still would be reluctant to play them because they're so good, even with the players they have, but certainly weakened for sure based on everything they've been dealing with. A few updates on the Ottawa Senators. We saw them play the other night in Calgary and had a couple of key players leave with injuries. No word exactly on Matthew Joseph yet, but he's certainly going to be out for a while. There's no doubt about him. Thomas Chabot, who left with an apparent foot injury, did go to practice this morning, did skate for a while, but did not, play the full ice time. He ended up leaving early. So I don't know if that's good, bad, or what. I mean, it's certainly, better than not being at practice at all. So that tells us that there's definitely an injury, but maybe it's not as bad as it looked, and maybe it's not as long-term as some thought. Maybe he misses a few games. I would doubt he plays tonight in Edmonton, but I would suspect that maybe it won't be too long after that. We'll have to see. We don't have a firm update on him. Parker Kelly also left practice early too, so I'm not sure if he's going to be able to go tonight. I'm going to suspect maybe not. Something happened with him. I didn't quite see or hear exactly what that was. Washington tonight, Ovechkin and Milano are both out. Milano's out with an illness. He's just sick, shouldn't be out too long. Ovi's out with a lower body injury. So both those guys out. Steven Stamkos in Tampa is also out tonight with a lower body injury. They didn't indicate, but I do wonder if there's any chance it's connected to that knee injury. We've seen him suffer a few games back. Obviously, it seems like he's been trying to play through whatever happened there. I mean, they never really made too big a deal about it, but was he just trying to play through it? Maybe it's worse or going to aggravate it. We don't know. I'm just speculating on that because we really don't have a lot of details. But the fact that he's out again with a lower body injury, with after that happening very recently, just makes me wonder if that's connected or not. Some other prospect news that's very encouraging. Toronto Maple Leafs, one of their top prospects, arguably their top prospect, actually, Matthew Knies, has been awarded the Big Ten Hockey Player of the Year award. He had excellent growth this year at University of Minnesota Duluth. Certainly had great progress. They put up 39 points in 34 regular season games. Last year, he ended up putting up 27 points in 28 games. So certainly, we've seen a year-over-year improvement, nice growth and development in his game. It is expected, we'll have to wait and get confirmation later, but many expect that once Knies' season is officially wrapped up at UMD, that he will sign with the Maple Leafs. It might even be able to get in a few regular season games and be available to them for the rest of their run here. So we'll see. They might be getting themselves another run, another player to help out here with this run. I know they've loaded up a lot at the deadline, so we'll see. Matthew Knies can play a variety of forward positions, but he is naturally left winger. That's likely where he slots at the NHL. I don't know exactly where they see him longer term, but I know there's probably a few players in that forward group that's likely not going to be there long term that Knies will slot in for likely next year and beyond as they try to get him established. Hard to say exactly where things go right now. It sounds like Sheldon Keefe is keen on going with the 11-7 setup, 11 forward 7D. He seems to think they've been playing better in that format, so we'll have to see. That certainly impacts the number of forwards in the lineup and their playing time. For sure. Now, onto the trade section of the day. A couple of things I want to take a look at. First up, Timo Meier in New Jersey, of course, was one of the biggest, if not the biggest trade at the deadline. A young power forward who's capable of scoring 30, 40 goals and being a big-time producer, changing teams at the deadline. He said he could make an argument that he was the biggest name and biggest deal of the deadline. Going to New Jersey, the talk now from Chris Johnston was that it's likely going to take an 8-year deal at $9 million to keep him signed and stay in the Devils organization. Of course, he's owed a $10 million qualifying offer, but all the reports indicated that Meier was willing to, talk about that and certainly sign for under 10. But most feel with his production, the way he's played, his age, the prime years, if you look at everything the way it's lining up, it's going to be at least 9, which certainly makes him, the highest paid player on the team. And obviously that's, could be problematic for their cap purposes. They also have to sign Jesper Bratt. There's been word that obviously he signed a 1-year deal, bet on himself, and has proven them that he's certainly worth a long-term, bigger money contract as well. But will that come in New Jersey? Will a Bratt trade end up taking place to make room for Timo? For my opinion, I would think that they would probably move a player like Bratt if it meant keeping Timo Meier in the mix. But at the end of the day, it's going to depend on how much of a cap increase we get, what kind of negotiation Bratt gets, and then Meier as well. Things could go differently where they're both still technically RFAs, but I wouldn't expect the Devils to want to flip Meier. I mean, if the negotiations go really poorly, maybe, I guess anything is possible, but I know they did not acquire him with the intention of trading him, but that sounds like it's going to be tough to do, and they're going to have to probably shed another player to keep him around, and I wonder if Bratt might end up being that guy. I guess we'll wait and see as we get further in the offseason. Same goes for the New York Rangers. Speculation now already from New York media wondering if Patrick Kane is going to want to stick around and stay to be a New York Ranger a little bit longer than just the trade deadline. I mean, if you look at all the deadline acquisitions and how they're doing with their new teams, I know I've seen some stats earlier that Patrick Kane and Vladimir Tarasenko, both picked up by the Rangers, don't quite have the same point production that you're seeing some other players get with their new squads. But it doesn't mean they won't produce when it matters most in the playoffs, so we'll have to wait and see where things go in that front. I think there's more likely a chance of Tarasenko being a rental in New York's case, but certainly Kane and the friendship and connection and on the ice as well with Panarin certainly is huge. I know he's obviously from New York State. Closer to Buffalo, though, is where he would call home. So I know there's a lot of people that thought eventually he would end up finishing his career with the Sabres, which I guess is still a remote possibility. Nobody really knows as well what Patrick Kane would sign for in his next contract. Clearly not going to be $10.5 million like he was getting paid previously, but how much less is he willing to take? I mean, we'll have to wait and see how his stat line finishes for the regular season and how things go in the playoffs. It's certainly going to play a big role and indication on what his next contract ends up being. I mean, he's accomplished a lot, multiple Stanley Cups, made a ton of money at this point in his career. Will he be one of those players you see that is willing to sign, a cheap contract, well under market value, just for a chance to play where he wants, make it work, and try to win more championships before he calls it a career? It's hard to say. We don't know at this point how long Patrick Kane's going to want to play. what kind of contract he's going to want a commitment from. Is he looking at this rate for like a 1-year deal? Is he going to want to do like a 3 or 4 year contract? And maybe this will be like the last bigger one that he does. It's hard to say. I mean, based on how Kane has played and his physical condition, injuries, everything he's dealt with, I wouldn't be shocked to see Kane play up around the age of 40 or maybe even more. You never know. I think he's one of those players that won't regress quite as much and will stay healthy enough to be able to continue his career that long if he wishes to do so. But of course, things can always change. You never know. A key injury could change that in a heartbeat. But obviously, some young players on that team need new contracts, and we don't know how much of a cap increase we're getting. It's likely not going to be that significant. When you need to re-sign K'Andre Miller, Philip Hedl, and Alexis Lafreniere, they're all going to get good bumps on their paychecks. So obviously, to keep Kane around, he'd have to sign pretty cheap, or at least one of those players, if not maybe more, will have to be moved in order to create the necessary space. I mean, there's some people that are probably not fond of moving a youngster for a player of Kane's age, but it really boils down to how good it makes the Rangers. And at the end of the day, if the Rangers end up keeping him and they win multiple championships with him in their lineup and they lose a young player or two in the process, long-term down the road, I don't really think anybody's going to care too much because they're going to have those Stanley Cup championships. But if things don't work out, that's when things get second-guessed and looked upon differently. But you have to wonder what Patrick Kane's future is in New York, and if him staying is going to mean a significant young player having to go because they just can't afford to keep everybody in the mix. So we'll see. Now, the Habs Oilers apparently were discussing a significant trade, according to Elliot Friedman. It's not the first we've heard of this, but we did hear a little bit more in the latest podcast about the strategy that Ken Holland and the Oilers were trying to do. They were real keen on getting Josh Anderson out of the Montreal Canadiens organization. They were offering a first-round pick, likely a player or two on the roster as well to make the money work. Obviously, Anderson comes with some term on his contract, so it's a longer-term issue to fit, but they were really only worried about making the cap situation work for the current season to have Josh Anderson for the playoffs. Obviously, they know the West, in my opinion, I think they would agree with this, is fairly wide open, and if they can have some good additions to that team to make themselves even stronger, then they want to be well-positioned to make a run and hopefully win the West and get to the Cup final. Obviously, that's a possibility. You add a player like Anderson, who's a big, strong, power forward type of winger, who can create space for those significantly offensively elite players like McDavid and Draisaitl, then that could be a huge fit there. I mean, Evander Kane's kind of brought in to do the same sort of thing, but obviously if you have another guy like Kane, that's just going to create that much more time and space. You have Zach Hyman, Nugent Hopkins in there as well to move and round things out. Obviously they moved on from Puljujarvi, which was nice to see him get a fresh start somewhere else as well. And Josh Anderson would have been an Oiler, except for the price of a first-round pick if Montreal had accepted. And I'm not sure what the players were involved, but there would have been at least one player likely going to the Habs to make the dollars work for the cap purposes. But the whole plan from Ken Holland and the Oilers, at least according to Friedman's belief here, is that they fully intended to do like a pump and dump, and they were going to trade him again likely at the NHL draft. They were going to get him to play, obviously, with McDavid. At times, maybe McDavid and Draisaitl both, and when they load up, probably fair to say that Anderson would have seen a significant bump in points. Really would have accelerated his point totals, and they were hoping that they could have then traded him again by the draft to get a first-round pick back, so they still had a pick in the first round, and maybe even get more as a return than what they traded for in the first place. So they were thinking about getting a rental player that not only would help them now, but helps the team out longer term as well. So, I mean, that's pretty creative thinking in my opinion. I do agree with the sentiment. Obviously, the Habs would not play along. We had heard reports that players like Anderson and Edmonton were getting significant interest, but especially in the case of Anderson, that the Habs were very reluctant to move him. They wanted to hang on to him. And to know that a first-round pick was on the table for that contract, I kind of wonder why the Montreal Canadiens did not accept. Clearly, they're going through a rebuild. I know you need some veterans around. I know Anderson's well-liked within the organization and all that. But to get a first-round pick, in a deep draft again, and something else as well, I'm not sure what the other pieces would have been. But still, that's a significant offer. I don't know if they were on the Holland strategy or they just absolutely did not want to move Anderson. I'm a bit surprised, though, that we didn't see a deal take place given what was reportedly offered. So let me know what your thoughts are. Should the Oilers and Habs revisit this? Do you think Edmonton could do that I mean, at this point, I think it's probably less likely, given what their strategy was, unless they decide that they are willing to part with their 2023 first-round pick and not have one in return. Maybe we do see a case where they figure out a way to make the money work, move something out, and bring Anderson in. I know it just seems to be a player that there's been rumors about the Oilers really liking him for quite some time. So doesn't mean it's ever going to be revisited or ever take place. But when you keep hearing these rumors keep popping up, and when the GM is really fixated on a player like that, you have to think at some point, if he wants to make changes on his roster, that he's going to keep going back to a player that they're quite fond of. So probably less likely to happen now, but fun to look back and say, if it would have happened, what could have been? Anderson could have been a great fit there in Edmonton. I don't know, like I said, what would have come off the roster to make the money work, but it could have been possible to do. And the Oilers would have been gambling that they could have gotten a first-round pick back later and basically, use Anderson for a short time and then give him away and kind of break even or do better, which would have been phenomenal as they could have made it happen. So let me know your thoughts on that and everything else discussed today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.